We've already talked about solutions, and that was more of what I wanted to tackle in this segment of the conversation. And we're going to hear first from Gregg Christopher. He's an FBI agent. He's with the FBI's Central Florida Human Trafficking Task Force that began in 2009. It recovers about 30 children a year from the sex trade.
The recovery of the victim is just the start of the case. That's when the whole investigation will start. At that point, you'll have a criminal investigation to try and identify the individual responsible and then to investigate the individual responsible. That investigation could take 6 months, a year, sometimes a year and a half. And during that time, you're trying to stabilize the victim. We have we talk about that we have two prongs to what we do. One's going to fail without the other. It's recovering and stabilizing a victim, and then prosecuting the individuals responsible. If you fail at one, if you fail to stabilize a victim, you're going to fail at prosecuting the case.
And I think he raises a really important point, and I know Jeannie and Frank, both of you have probably had this experience with trying to keep someone engaged in wanting to help prosecute when they've been so emotionally traumatized. Do you sometimes lose victims in the process of trying to move cases forward?
Absolutely, and in fact, in the state of Florida, we do attempt to prosecute without the victim. It's called victimless prosecution, and what we try to do is develop other substantial, circumstantial evidence or direct evidence to support the claim so that if the victim does not appear or the victim refuses to testify, we can still go forward. It's very similar to how we prosecute a case of homicide. The victim in a homicide case, and I know Zach's given me the nod here, victim in a homicide case cannot testify to how he or she was killed. We have to build a case based on other evidence and other information that we gather. And we've done that also in cases where victims cannot go forward, and they actually are survivors, but they cannot go forward. It's a very, very difficult time for survivors because it requires them to go back in time. Prosecution is holding people accountable for what they've done in the past. And we do use the technique of explaining to the victim that you're helping people in the future when you relive the past, but for some people that is so traumatizing and so difficult that they just cannot go forward. And I don't know what your point of view of that is, dealing with them as an investigator, but I suspect you have the same contact with them.
And I think we had talked about it earlier in that segment, is getting people in a position to accept help, which can sometimes be incredibly difficult. How do we get people to accept the help that we can give them? How do we put them in a good position to do that stuff? And it comes down to there are times that, just like the young lady that's featured in the article, it comes down to a team of people, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, victim advocates, that have to sit down around the table and make tough decisions. And some of them aren't great, and people don't always agree with the decisions we make. And this has happened to us before too. There are times that it's not going to be a simple, easy answer. It's going to be messy. It's going to be dirty. It's going to be the best solution we have at the time.
I think it's very important for everyone in this room to know that the Department of Children and Families Hotline, which we have always thought of as being the hotline for child abuse cases, takes calls to investigate child exploitation cases. It's specifically delineated in the statute. So if something looks wrong, if a child that you have some kind of relationship with shares something with you that gives you great concern, instead of looking at it and saying, this can't be happening in our community, or this can't be happening to my niece, or this can't be happening to this child that's at schools, PK Young. Instead of taking that position, call the hotline and let the hotline decide whether or not it's a viable claim. Let the hotline, those who are experienced and skilled in interviewing and in investigating, have the hotline folks make that decision. Because just as all of these speakers have said, this is a very prevalent problem, and it's such a taboo. Children are molested in their homes daily. But the community doesn't want to believe that because we want to believe that the family unit is the safest place in our community. So it's a contradiction. So it's a taboo to share that maybe you were victimized. So if you get this information from wherever you get it from and you believe that there's any ounce of credibility to it, report it. Once we start reporting, we're going to start seeing communities understand and comprehend the victimization.
And you're going to see ideologies change in the judiciary. You're going to see
Yes.
ideologies change in law enforcement because, by the way, you know, I'm on the distribution list for the National Human Trafficking Hotline for my county. It's gone up 300% in a month because we got 3. So we're doing something right because people are picking up the phone. So, I mean, those things are very important because that's what's going to go to our elected officials looking and saying that we can document all this stuff. It's happening. It's changing. Yes, we're going to have to dedicate people to it. Yes, we're going to have to dedicate assets to it and those things. So picking up the phone and answering it, there's always a collision between mechanics and theory. And having been a sworn law enforcement officer on the phone with the DCF hotline, I'm reporting a child who is probably a victim of domestic minor sex trafficking and been told we don't handle that. We'll document this, but we're not going to initiate a report. I get a call 8 hours later from the supervisor that's sending an investigator out. We've reviewed this. We're sorry. We're on it. We got it. You know, so now, you know, I have somebody that's trained. I know human trafficking. It's something I know about. And we get people on the other end of the phone that don't want to listen. Well, that's not my job. Well, yes, it is. It's in the statute. No, it's not. You have this agreement then. So it all comes back around to training.
And David, you have a new and different window into that world through the stolen ones and the extensive amount of time that you spent looking at the issue through the eyes of so many different players in the story. And when you think about solutions and the approach going forward in the future, and you think about law enforcement, and you think about public awareness and stopping the market, what do you see?
Actually, I think I tend to think about more what journalists can do, because you don't have to be a journalist to see that there is a paradigm shift here. There's a groundswell. We're having these conversations that I don't think we were having a year ago or a year and a half ago when I started working on this. So Frank used the analogy of a hydra for this issue because there are so many moving parts. There's law enforcement, advocates, survivors. Well, journalism is a part of that too. Reporters are. And that is just a hard story to pitch, that I have this hydra of an issue with all of these different elements. So we had to go through those same things. And I had to convince an editor that, wait, this is a story we should work on. This is something we should care about. So I think we're all kind of in the same boat. You know, I work in journalism, so I can see that up close. But when I'm talking with law enforcement and advocates, they're having the same exact conversations. Because it's just one of those things we hadn't want to talk about. It's taboo in newspapers to write about sex with children too. So we're all kind of in it together.
Once you look through the looking glass, though, there's no going back. After that, I mean, once you understand it, you take it on. You can't go back. You can't unring the bell. You can't undo it.
And I think what was interesting in your article was the discussion of the mother and the daughter. That the daughter had to be placed up in the Panhandle awaiting trial. What's interesting is most reports of abuse of a family member come to the mother, the custodial female in the family. And the mother sees the threat of losing someone she may love, losing a wage earner, and the embarrassment and the shame upon the family. And so children are often seen but not heard, or they're not believed. And I think your article very much expressed how difficult it is for that child who grows then who runs away at 15 and 16 and really has no family, how difficult it is for them to re-engage with their family
Right.
because of the taboo nature and the shame that's brought on. You're the one who told everybody.
Right.
Oh, don't think that mom didn't know. She may have been abused when she was a child. You're the one who told everybody.
Right. Right.
It's a big secret.
And in most cases, and I'm not a member of the family, so
Right.
I can only know what I know. In Mo's case, she told me that she felt ashamed to tell her mother, and instead, through a series of events, getting in trouble and all of that, ended up confiding in her aunt, who happened to be a county commissioner, and she got things moving.
Yes.
So, it's a family
Yes.
issue when you really drill down to it, and
Yes.
something we need to talk about.
And tell us a little bit more about Mo. I think some people might be interested in exploring that story as well through the stolen ones, but she was a young girl who finally, after being involved in the child sex trade, she fled back to her mother one day at her hair salon, and her mother had been looking for her and didn't know where she was.
Right. Her mother had heard rumors. It's a very tight-knit community in northern Sarasota, traditionally black neighborhood, segregated community. And she'd run away and come back, run away and come home. And then for an extended period, she didn't come home. Her mother had heard rumors. And one day she finally leaves, and it's only a couple blocks. And she's at her doorstep and says, this is going on. Help me. And Mom didn't know what to do.
And it was a struggle to keep her stabilized and comforted, so to speak, well enough to kind of get her through the process to help prosecute the people who were involved in what had happened to her.
In Mo's case, it was more than a struggle. Ultimately, the prosecutors were having conversations, and Mom eventually comes to a judge because Mo had been in some violation of probation, I think, and says, "Can you please lock her away?" To get her the help, she sort of had to be locked up, and she's both thankful for that and angry about it in retrospect. And she seems to be doing well, but she's still testifying this week in another trial.
Oh my gosh.
And
She's
Frank,
going through a lot.
and as all of the girls do, and all of the children and the women who were involved in that, what about, as far as the stabilization process is concerned, there is a debate now about locking up the victims for a period of time to keep them available to the prosecutors versus putting them in a safe house where they could potentially run away. Many of them do. What's your perspective on, once you find someone who's been victimized, what should happen next?
Human trafficking is a complicated crime, and it takes a sophisticated response. In a lot of ways here in Florida, we are blessed to have agencies that provide victim services. We have the Florida Child Advocacy Centers, and we have a lot of local child advocacy centers, including one right here in Gainesville. Also, you would be very proud of the job that our federal and state law enforcement agencies are doing as far as victim services. They are very sophisticated. The cases that I've dealt with, I've learned, I'm smart enough now to understand that I must have a victim, and I especially would like to have a cooperative victim in order to prove my case. So not only do I want to really help that person from a heart level, but also I want to successfully prosecute the person who's committed this crime. And so I understand the necessity and the need for bringing the survivor the necessary services that they need, and let alone just to make sure I know where they are so that I can use them if necessary during the investigation. So the FBI, the Child Advocacy Centers, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the State Attorney's Office, Victim Services, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Victim Services personnel, they do an awesome job in ensuring that those victims and survivors are getting the help that they need, as well as the follow-on help that they need. So I have not had an instance where we haven't been able to at least find the victim after they had, well, I've had a number of them, though, that fled after the crime, after there was an arrest that was made, which, of course, put our case in jeopardy. But in every instance I've had a victim, my victims were present and ready to testify if necessary at the trial or prior to the defendant entering a guilty plea. But that's all a part of what I said. It's a complicated crime. It requires a sophisticated response. I really see law enforcement today, at the state level and at the national level, is really gearing up to really understand this crime and figure out exactly what we need to do to better investigate and prosecute it. What I want you to know is that's not the solution here. We can prosecute more cases, and we can send more people to prison, and we can help bring more services to victims and survivors. But that's not going to stop this from happening. If you want to talk about stopping this from happening and you're serious about it, you're going to have to go to the heart of this dragon, and that's going to be the marketplace. Why is there a market for this commodity, for sex with children and women at this level? By the way, if you want to know, again, how serious this crime is, you're probably familiar with the predator operations that we run all across the state, and where we go online with law enforcement and we act as though we're a child at home alone. And you're probably familiar with all of the arrests that are made over a weekend, a dozen or 2 dozen. Do you think the people who commit those crimes wouldn't do it if the person was selling that child for a sexual reason, to engage in for the same purpose? Do you? No, that's the marketplace that I'm talking about. The fact that there are people who are looking for this commodity, again, these are other human beings for sexual purposes on the street, on the internet, wherever. That's what's going on, and that's what's happening right here. If you really want to do something about this, we need to help others become more aware of the seriousness of this problem and how it's taking place. We need to bring this all into light, because that's the way we're going to have an impact on this problem.
And Frank, that is a very good final thought for this segment of the conversation, and we'll be wrapping it up. We are going to leave with one final thought from a survivor. Her name is Brooke Bellow. We'll take a glimpse of her experience and her road to recovery.
All you need to have is emotional chains as a child. All you need is for someone to scare you and tell you that this is who you are and this is who you're going to be, and if you're not going to stay here, be here, you're not going to live. It doesn't take a lot, because you're just a baby. There are people that seem really nice, and all of a sudden they turn into like these evil beings. And at first we looked at each other and we laughed. My best friend and I, because we thought they were joking. And I don't even tell like that sometimes, but I remember her looking at me laughing, because we're thinking they're playing a game at first. We had already been through hell, but we just didn't see this coming. And so when he grabbed me, took me outside and hung me over the balcony, took out a razor blade and started beating me, well, I had to go to the bathroom, strip my clothes off, be in the bathtub, and they proceeded to tell us who we're going to do, what we're going to be. To season us, they had me take heroin. They dressed us, and within a few hours, we were out on Imperial Highway in Los Angeles, prostituting. It was in my early 20s, I guess, before I left that, and I was probably in my early 30s before I was able to break the drug addiction. And it's probably just been the last 3 years that after a lot of prayer, a lot of therapy, and a lot of rewiring of the heart and the mind, that I was able to discover my identity, who I was really meant to be, and it took a really long time.
And who better to hear a final thought from than a survivor who can really give us a view into the experiences and the truth and the reality of human sex trafficking right here in our state, right here in our communities. And there's much more of this for you to see and explore through the Stolen Ones at the Sarasota Herald-Tribune. Thank you all to all of the members of our panel tonight for this conversation, and to our audience as well.
Thank you.